Everyone, Sam here. Wanted to come on here for this week's Start of the Day Tuesday. This week, I'm going to talk about one of the most, dangerous things that I see when people are preparing for investment banking recruiting, right? And this Start of the Day, it was inspired by, a conversation I had earlier today with someone that I talked to who's trying to get into investment banking. But in fact, it's not just him, but I talk to students like this every single day, if not every single week. Where the most dangerous thing when it comes to recruiting is when you don't know what you don't know. Okay. And a lot of people fall into this trap where they feel like they know where they're at in terms of, because one question that I always ask people is, we break up the different parts of recruiting that you kind of need to be really good at, right? Whether it's, your application materials, like your resume, cover letter, LinkedIn profile, or whether it's your networking skills, or whether it's your behavioral interviews, or whether it's your technical interviews. Like those are kind of like the four different major components that you need in order to be successful, right, in the recruiting process. Now, when it comes to not knowing what you don't know, I think it could apply to all of those areas, quite frankly, but the areas that it applies to the most is when it comes to your behavioral interviews and your technical interviews. Okay, so I'll explain what I mean by that. But a lot of times I'll ask people okay, let's talk about technical interviews for a second, right? Like, where do you think you're at currently when it comes to your technical interviewing skills? So, for example, let's just tick through all the different concepts that an interviewer might test you on in an investment banking interview, right? So, maybe the first one is on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you rate yourself when it comes to 3-statement questions? Okay, and then so you'll pick a number, and you guys can try to answer this yourself right now, but whatever you think, you're like, I'm a 7, I'm a 6, I'm an 8, I'm a 10, whatever, right? Rarely hear people ever say 10, but okay, so the person said 7. Like this person that I was talking to today specifically, they said, oh God, I think I'm at a 7. Or actually they said I'm at a 6 to 8. And I said, okay, then what about valuation methodologies? Oh, I'm pretty good at valuation methodologies. I think I'm on an 8 or 9 with valuation methodologies. I said, okay, great. What about, mergers and acquisitions and accretion dilution and just M&A math in general? And they said, oh, I think I'm at a 5 or 6. I said, okay, so it's a little bit lower. And then I said, what about leverage buyouts, like LBOs, right? And he said, oh, that's like a 1 or 2. So on the LBOs, they felt really uncomfortable with it, and they knew that they didn't really know that topic very well. But I was like, okay, so let's just pick the easiest one, right? Say the accounting stuff, 3 statements, right? That's like the foundation. That's the fundamentals that you really need to know really well, because everything else, when it comes to technical interviews, is kind of built off of your knowledge with the accounting stuff. Like if you don't know your accounting well, or you don't know the 3 statements, it's going to be really hard to be good at valuation methodologies and be good at accretion, dilution, and M&A math and LBOs and things like that, right? So since he rated himself a 6 or an 8, I said, okay, so you're about a 7 for 3 statements, right? And I said, okay, if I asked you a simple 3-statement question, do you think you'd be able to answer it? And they said, yeah, I don't know, I hope so. I said, okay, should we try one? I said, yeah, sure. So we tried one, and I asked him a pretty simple 3-statement question. And long story short, he tried to answer it, but his answer was really, really off. It was not the right answer. He did not have the right steps in terms of how he approached the answer, but also even the steps that he did take, he didn't use the right numbers, and he didn't have the right definitions for just in terms of the understanding. And so bottom line is he was definitely nowhere close to being a 6 to 8 on the 3-statement question. I would say he was closer to maybe a 2 or a 3. Okay. And so that's a dangerous thing, right? Because I see a lot of people make this mistake where they feel like they are here when it comes to their readiness and their preparation, but they're actually here, right? And there's actually like a lot more work that they still have to do, but they feel like they're already ready, or they're almost ready, or they're close to being ready, right? And the reason why most people fall into this trap is because honestly, like maybe when you're reading these interview guides, for example, and you're learning these technical concepts and you're reading on a page and they're telling you how it works, it all makes sense. So when you're reading something, you feel like, yeah, I understand that. Yeah, like I get it. I could probably do this in an interview. But like then when you actually get tested on it, when it comes time to apply that knowledge, what I call like application knowledge, you're not quite there in terms of your skill level, right? Like maybe you've memorized the formulas, or maybe you think you understand something, but like you really don't, right? And after he answered the question, which was like a pretty horrible answer, I then showed him how I would actually answer that question, like what's the correct answer, right? And he realized how off his answer was from the actual right answer. And that was like a huge wake up call for him, right? In terms of, oh, wow, like I actually don't know nearly as much as I think I do, right? And given where we are in recruiting already, like he's recruiting for summer 2020, which is happening right now. There's not a whole lot of time to get his knowledge level to where it needs to be, right? And so, but before you can even get your knowledge level to where it needs to be, the first step is that you need to know where you're falling short, right? And so a lot of times you can't be the one that's assessing that on your own, because if you're assessing that on your own, you're going to have a lot of blind spots in terms of you don't see what you're doing wrong, right? Because if you knew what you were doing wrong already, then you wouldn't have gotten it wrong in the first place, right? I'll give you another example of this where people just don't know what they don't know. Like this is even more common when it comes to behavioral interviews, okay? Because with behavioral interviews, is unlike technical interviews where there's actually a right or a wrong answer. With behavioral interviews, there's actually it's more open ended, right? Like there's no like standard answer. Like there are definitely like best practices and principles you should follow when you're answering these questions, but it's not like if you wrote out your behavioral answers for a certain question, you can then go and read an interview guide and compare your answer to the guy answering the guy, and it'll give you like the exact answer you have and tell you like whether your answer is right or wrong, right? So the problem that most people have when it comes to behavioral interviews is that they'll try to anticipate what questions they should prepare for. They'll write out all of their answers for these questions that they're anticipating, and they're putting their best foot forward, like coming up with the best answer they could come up with, and they just hope that the answer is good enough. And they'll memorize the answer, rehearse it, practice it, and then they'll go into these interviews. If they get interviews, they'll go into these interviews and they'll just use these answers that they prepared, and they hope that works, right? And a lot of times when it doesn't work, in fact, like they'll come out of the interview and I'll ask them, "How do you feel like you did on that interview?" And they'll say, oh, I think it went great. Like I answered all the questions. Right? I got all the technical questions and I answered all the behavioral questions. So I think I did pretty well." And then later on, when we find out that, oh, they actually didn't move on to the next round, or they didn't get selected for the Super Day, or they didn't get, the job offer, they're completely baffled as to like why they didn't get it or how that happened. And usually when that happens is because your behavioral answers weren't good enough, or there's something about it that the interviewer didn't like, right? But it's not like the interviewer is going to tell you what you did wrong or what you could have done better, right? Like you don't get that type of feedback from your interviewers. And so you just continue to use those same answers in the next interview and the next interview and the interview after that, and you continue to make the same mistakes. And before you know it, you run out of interview opportunities because you keep giving the same wrong answers, right? And you don't know what you're supposed to fix, because if you did know what you could fix about your answers, that you would have already, that wouldn't have been your answer in the first place. You would have already done it, right? So that's what I mean by how it's really dangerous when you don't know what you don't know, right? And so a big part of figuring out what you don't know is talking to someone who knows more than you, right? And getting feedback from them in terms of what you're not doing well enough and what you could be doing better, right? And so that is a big part of what I try to do on these strategy sessions, right? Is I ask you questions about things that you've been doing, and depending on your answers, I give you my assessment of what you're doing correctly and what you're not doing correctly, right? And a lot of times, if you're not doing something correctly and I point it out, it becomes really obvious immediately, and then you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Right? That happens all the time. But until I point it out, you would have never figured that out in the first place, right? And so that's why it's so valuable to talk to people who are more experienced than you, who can actually give you real feedback and critique. And by the way, this feedback and critique that I give you is not based on like just my personal opinion, or like it's not the same as saying, oh, I talked to an upperclassman and who maybe has gone through recruiting once already and maybe they got a job, and that's just based on like the one person's experience. Right? They didn't even tell you their opinion in terms of what works and what doesn't, but what worked for them might not work for you, right? Because every client's different, right? The advice that I'm going to give you is based on hundreds of people that I've interviewed or helped as my own clients. I've seen a bunch of different people interview. I've seen pretty much all the answers you could possibly see when it comes to investment banking interviews, and I have this wealth of knowledge and this database of just answers that I've seen that I can kind of calibrate your answers against and tell you whether your answers are good enough, because you can't be the judge of that, and then secondly, if it's not good enough, what can we actually do to make it better, right? So that's why I always encourage you guys to like book this strategy session with me, right? It's a free strategy session. You have nothing to lose. And the whole point of a strategy session is for me to help you gain clarity on where you're at currently and what else you still need to do to set yourself up for success, right? And sometimes, that might mean that, hey, like you need to get help from someone like me, right? And if that's the case, I'll tell you. But a lot of times it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to get help from someone like me. It could just be like a quick fix here or there, and I could just tell you that like real quick on the spot, and then you can just fix it, right? And you don't have to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So that's the value in having these conversations, right? So again, like regardless how you feel about your current status or candidacy or how prepared you think you may be, there's no reason to take that risk. There's no reason to just assume that everything's good enough and then go into that interview. If you get the interview, go into that interview feeling like, well, let's just hope for the best, right? Like I've prepared the best that I can. Let's just hope that this is good enough. You want to be certain, right? Like these interviews are extremely difficult to come by. And if you get these interviews, you want to make sure that you are going in completely prepared and confident, and you have the certainty that you've covered all your bases, right? And you should be doing that before you go in the interview, and the strategy session is a great opportunity for you to do that, right? So again, as usual, I'm going to invite you guys to book a strategy session with me. My calendar is actually honestly pretty freaking packed this week and next week. In fact, next week, I'm going on like a baby moon trip with my wife because we're expecting our first kid. And so I'm actually not even taking calls like the second half of next week. But as of right now, there are definitely still some openings before I go on the trip, but they're filling up really quickly. And so you guys want to take advantage and try to get on my calendar. Now, if you try to schedule a call and there's no openings, then there's a link on there for you to add yourself to the wait list. And a lot of times people book a call and then they don't make it or whatever, and things open up last minute, then I can like contact you and let you know and ask you if you want to take the time slot instead. Okay, so I'm gonna drop the link down here again as usual. Strategy section. And again, this strategy section is totally free, right? So you have nothing to lose. But ultramastermind.com/apply. And yeah, I encourage every single one of you guys to do this, especially if you are someone who's going through summer 2020 recruiting right now. Get yourself in there before all the time slots get taken up. We're deep in the middle of recruiting right now. If there's anything that you need to be fixing, you want to make sure that you're fixing it as soon as possible. The sooner you fix it, the better, right? Sometimes these things take a little bit longer to fix. And so the sooner you can find out about it, the more likely you'll be able to fix it before you actually have to go into an interview. Okay. So again, book a strategy session. I dropped the link down below. Feel free to schedule a call during a time that works for you. Or if there's nothing available for a time that works for you, then put yourself on the wait list and I'll reach out to you when I have time that opens up. And then I look forward to talking to you. All right. So that's it for this week. I'll talk to you guys again next week. Bye.